I learned the hard way that installing security cameras around my property was the smartest decision I ever made, especially when the Oakridge Hills Homeowners Association decided to wage war on my fence at 3 in the morning. My name is Prescott, and I had been living in my modest 3-bedroom house in suburban Phoenix, Arizona for about 2 years when everything went sideways. The neighborhood was one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looked vaguely similar, with beige stucco exteriors and terracotta roof tiles that baked under the relentless desert sun. When I first moved in, the HOA seemed like a minor annoyance at worst. Sure, they had their monthly dues and their endless lists of regulations about what color you could paint your mailbox or how tall your grass could grow, but I figured I could live with it. That was before I met Wendy Lancaster. Wendy was the president of the Oakridge Hills HOA, a position she apparently took as seriously as a military general commanding troops in wartime. She was in her late 40s, with blonde hair that was always styled in that particular suburban mom way where every strand seemed shellacked into place. She drove a white Lexus SUV and had a habit of cruising through the neighborhood at odd hours, looking for violations with the intensity of a bloodhound tracking a scent. The first time Wendy knocked on my door, it was to inform me that my garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. I had forgotten to roll them back behind my side gate after trash pickup. She stood on my doorstep with a clipboard, her lips pressed into a thin line as she explained that this was a violation of Section 12.4 of the HOA bylaws. I apologized, moved the cans, and thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next 6 months, I received violation notices for letting my lawn grow a 1/4 inch too tall, for having a small oil stain on my driveway that I was already planning to clean, for hanging a wreath on my door during Christmas that was apparently the wrong shade of red, and for parking my work truck in my own driveway overnight instead of in the garage. Each violation came with a fine ranging from $50 to $200, and each one required me to take time off work to either fix the issue or attend a hearing to contest it. The fence situation started innocently enough. The original fence that came with the property was a sad weathered wood thing that was falling apart. Several slats were missing, the posts were rotting at the base, and the whole structure leaned at a precarious angle that suggested the next strong wind would take it down. I decided to replace it with a nice vinyl fence that would last longer and require less maintenance in the Arizona heat. I did everything by the book. I submitted my architectural modification request to the HOA, complete with diagrams, material specifications, and photos of the proposed fence style. I even included 3 different color options for them to choose from. According to the HOA bylaws, they had 30 days to approve or deny the request, and if they failed to respond within that time frame, the request was automatically approved. 35 days passed with no response. I called the HOA management company twice and left messages both times. Finally, I sent a certified letter noting that per their own bylaws, my request was approved by default due to their failure to respond within the specified time frame. I kept copies of everything, including the certified mail receipt showing they had signed for and received my letter. I hired a local contractor named Miguel who specialized in fence installation. He and his crew worked for 3 days in early April, tearing down the old fence and installing a beautiful new 6-foot vinyl privacy fence in a color called Adobe Cream that matched perfectly with the house. It looked professional, clean, and significantly improved the appearance of my backyard. Several neighbors even stopped by to compliment it. The fence was up for exactly 1 week before I received a hand-delivered letter from Wendy herself. She came to my door on a Saturday morning, her face flushed with what I could only describe as righteous indignation. She thrust the envelope at me before I could even say hello. "Mr. Prescott, this fence is in clear violation of HOA regulations," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You did not receive approval for this modification." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Actually, Wendy, I submitted my request over a month ago. Your bylaws state that failure to respond within 30 days constitutes automatic approval. I have all the documentation." Her eyes narrowed. "I have no record of receiving any such request. I have the certified mail receipt showing someone at the HOA office signed for it," I replied evenly. "I also have copies of my phone call logs and the original application with the date stamp from the post office." "That fence needs to come down," she said, ignoring my explanation entirely. "You have 2 weeks to remove it or we will take action. This letter serves as your official notice." She turned on her heel and stalked back to her Lexus before I could respond. I stood there holding the letter, feeling my blood pressure rising. The letter inside was even more absurd than her verbal warning. It claimed that the fence violated multiple regulations, including being too tall, the wrong color, and installed without approval. It threatened daily fines of $100 starting in 2 weeks if I did not remove it at my own expense. I immediately contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. His name was Martin Chen. and he came highly recommended from several online forums where people shared their HOA horror stories. Martin reviewed all my documentation during our first meeting in his downtown Phoenix office. "You have an airtight case," he said, adjusting his glasses as he looked over the paperwork. "You followed their procedures exactly. They failed to respond within their own specified time frame. They are legally bound by their own bylaws to consider this approved." "So what do?" I asked. "I will send them a letter explaining the legal situation. That usually resolves these things. Most HOAs back down when they realize they do not have a leg to stand on." Martin sent his letter, which I am sure was politely worded but firmly explained that I had followed all proper procedures and that any attempt to fine me or force removal of the fence would result in immediate legal action. I thought that would be the end of it. For 2 weeks, everything was quiet. I started to relax, thinking maybe Wendy and her HOA board had finally realized they were in the wrong. I should have known better. I worked as an electrical engineer for a renewable energy company, which sometimes required me to travel to various solar farm sites around Arizona and neighboring states. In mid-May, I had a 3-day trip scheduled to a site near Flagstaff. Before I left, I did something that turned out to be the smartest decision of my entire life. A few months earlier, I had purchased 4 trail cameras originally intended for a hunting trip with my brother that never materialized. These were high-quality cameras with night vision, motion detection, and the ability to record video clips to SD cards. They had been sitting in my garage, unused. On a whim, the morning before I left for my trip, I decided to install them around my property. I was not specifically expecting trouble, but something about the way Wendy had been so insistent about the fence made me uneasy. I mounted one camera on a tree that had a clear view of the fence along the back property line. I placed another on the corner of my house pointing toward the side yard. The third went near the garage, covering the driveway and front of the house. The fourth I positioned to capture the other side yard and part of the backyard. I made sure they were well hidden but had clear sight lines, adjusted the settings for maximum video quality, and inserted large-capacity SD cards that could hold days of footage. I left for Flagstaff on a Tuesday morning, expecting to return late Thursday evening. The solar farm project was about 2 hours north, and we were upgrading some of the monitoring equipment. Cell service at the site was spotty at best, which was normal for these remote locations. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday focused on work, staying in a small hotel in Flagstaff, and barely checking my phone except to confirm I had no major messages. Thursday afternoon, I finished up earlier than expected and decided to head home rather than spend another night. I grabbed a late lunch in Flagstaff and started the drive back to Phoenix around 3. The drive was pleasant, with the landscape gradually changing from pine forest to high desert as I descended in elevation. I arrived home around 5:30, tired and looking forward to a quiet evening and my own bed. The moment I pulled into my driveway, I knew something was catastrophically wrong. My fence was gone. Not damaged, not vandalized. Gone, completely removed. Where a perfectly good vinyl fence had stood that morning I left, there was now nothing but disturbed dirt and empty post holes. I sat in my truck, staring in disbelief. My first thought was that I had somehow gotten confused, that maybe I was looking at the wrong yard. But no, this was definitely my house. My landscaping, my shed, my patio furniture all sat exposed where the fence had previously provided privacy and protection. I got out of the truck slowly, my mind racing. I walked around the entire perimeter of my property. Every single section of the fence was gone. The posts, the panels, the gates, everything had been removed. It was a professional demolition job. Whoever did this had not left a single piece behind. They had even filled in some of the post holes, though not all of them, leaving the ground uneven and messy. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called Martin Chen. It went to voicemail because it was after business hours, so I left a message explaining what had happened, trying to keep my voice steady. Then I called the Phoenix Police Department non-emergency line. The dispatcher who answered listened to my explanation and said she would send an officer to take a report. While I waited, I walked around my yard again, looking for any clues about who had done this. There were tire tracks in the dirt near the side yard, the kind that would come from a large truck or trailer. Some of the landscaping near where the fence posts had been was trampled. Officer Ramirez arrived about 40 minutes later. He was a middle-aged cop with a weathered face who looked like he had seen everything. I explained the situation, showed him where the fence had been, and told him about the ongoing dispute with the HOA. "So you think your HOA did this?" he asked, making notes in a small notebook. "I cannot prove it yet, but yes, I think they are behind it," I said. "The fence was here when I left Tuesday morning. I have been out of town for work. I come home and it is gone." "Do you have any security cameras?" he asked. That is when I remembered. The trail cameras. In the shock of seeing the fence gone, I had completely forgotten about them. "Actually, yes," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "I installed 4 trail cameras before I left. They should have captured everything." Officer Ramirez's expression shifted to something more interested. Well, let us take a look at that footage. If someone came onto your property and removed your fence without permission, that is criminal trespassing and destruction of property at minimum, possibly theft depending on whether they took the materials. We went to each camera location. My heart was pounding as I removed the first SD card from the camera that overlooked the back fence line. We went inside and I pulled out my laptop, inserting the SD card into the reader. The camera had organized the footage by date and time, with each motion-triggered event saved as a separate video file. I scrolled to Wednesday, and there it was. Multiple video files starting at 3:14 in the morning. I clicked on the first file. The footage was crystal clear, even in the night vision mode. The timestamp showed 3:14 a.m. on Wednesday. The video showed a large commercial truck backing into my side yard, followed by two more vehicles, a white Lexus SUV that I immediately recognized as Wendy's, and a pickup truck with Johnson's Property Services written on the side. The camera had captured everything in perfect detail. 4 men got out of the trucks and immediately started working on the fence. They had portable work lights that they set up, flooding my backyard with harsh white light. I watched in stunned silence as they used power tools to dismantle the fence panels, working quickly and efficiently. The whole operation had clearly been planned. But the most damning part was what happened next. Wendy Lancaster herself got out of her Lexus, walked right up to the work crew and started directing them, pointing at different sections of the fence. The video clearly showed her face, her gestures, her obvious supervision of the entire operation. "That is her," I said, pointing at the screen. "That is Wendy Lancaster, the HOA president." Officer Ramirez leaned closer to the screen. "Keep playing it." I let the footage continue. Over the next 2 hours, documented across multiple video clips from different camera angles, the crew systematically dismantled my entire fence. They loaded all the panels and posts onto the truck. The cameras caught them trampling my landscaping, caught Wendy checking her phone and making calls, caught everything. The sun was starting to rise in the last video clip as the trucks drove away, leaving my yard completely exposed. "Do you have footage from the other cameras?" Officer Ramirez asked. I checked all 4 cameras. Each one had captured the demolition from different angles. The camera on my house got a perfect shot of the truck's license plate. Another camera caught crystal clear footage of Wendy's face as she walked past, close enough that you could count her eyelashes. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. "Mr. Prescott, this is pretty serious," Officer Ramirez said. "What I am seeing here is trespassing, destruction of property, and possibly theft of the fence materials. The fact that it was done in the middle of the night suggests they knew what they were doing was wrong. I need you to make copies of all this footage. I am going to write up a report, and a detective will probably want to follow up with you." "What happens now?" I asked. "Well, based on what I am seeing here, we have probable cause for criminal charges. The detective will review everything and determine what charges to file. You will also want to provide all this to your attorney for the civil side of things. You have got solid documentation here." Officer Ramirez spent another hour taking detailed notes, getting measurements of the area where the fence had been, and photographing the tire tracks and disturbed landscaping. He gave me a case number and told me to expect a call from a detective within the next few days. After he left, I sat down at my kitchen table and tried to process everything. I made copies of all the footage onto multiple USB drives, my computer, and uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage account. Then I sent an email to Martin Chen with a summary of what had happened and links to download the footage. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me wonder if Wendy and her crew were coming back to do something else. I kept getting up and checking the windows, looking out at my now fenceless yard. Friday morning, Martin called me before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. "Aaron, I just watched the footage. This is incredible. I mean, I cannot believe they actually did this, but the evidence is absolutely perfect. We have them dead to rights." "What do we do?" I asked. "First, I am going to send a letter to the HOA, their management company, and their attorney if they have one, demanding immediate restoration of your fence and compensation for damages. I am also going to file for an emergency injunction to prevent them from taking any further action against you or your property. On the criminal side, cooperate fully with the police investigation. This is going to get very serious for them very quickly." "Why would they do this?" I asked, still baffled by the sheer audacity of it. "They have been on me about violations, but to actually come onto my property and tear down my fence in the middle of the night?" "Power trip," Martin said bluntly. "I have been dealing with HOA cases for 15 years. Some of these board members get a tiny bit of authority and it goes straight to their heads. They start thinking they can do whatever they want. Usually they stick to harassment through fines and violation notices. This is next level, though. This is criminal." That afternoon, I received a call from Detective Sarah Morrison with the Phoenix Police Department Property Crimes Unit. She had reviewed Officer Ramirez's report and the footage. She wanted to meet with me to go over everything in detail and get a formal statement. We met at the police station Saturday morning. Detective Morrison was a sharp woman in her 30s with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and an intensity that told me she took her job seriously. I walked her through the entire history with the HOA, the fence installation, the disputes, and finally the demolition. I provided her with copies of all the footage, my documentation of the original fence approval, and Martin's letters to the HOA. "This is one of the more brazen cases I have seen," she said, reviewing the footage on her computer. "The fact that they did it in the middle of the night when they knew you were gone shows premeditation. The HOA president being directly involved is going to make this a bigger deal. I am going to bring this to the prosecutor's office. We are looking at multiple felonies here." "Felonies?" I asked, surprised. "The value of the fence and the installation labor means we are talking about property destruction exceeding several $1,000s. That bumps it up from a misdemeanor. Add in the trespassing under circumstances indicating criminal intent, possible theft if we can prove they took the materials for their own benefit or to sell them, and we have got a case." "What happens to Wendy and the people who actually did the work?" I asked. "I will be interviewing everyone involved. The work crew might cooperate if they claim they were just following orders and did not know what they were doing was illegal, but your HOA president is going to have a harder time explaining this away. She clearly knew you were disputing the fence and that you had legal representation. Then she organized and supervised its removal in the middle of the night while you were out of town. That shows consciousness of guilt." Over the next week, things moved faster than I expected. Martin filed the emergency injunction and also filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA, Wendy Lancaster personally, and the Johnson's Property Services Company that had done the actual demolition work. The lawsuit demanded restoration of the fence, compensation for damages, legal fees, and punitive damages for the malicious nature of the trespass and destruction. The HOA's response came in the form of a letter from their attorney, a guy named Richard Bowman who apparently specialized in defending HOAs. The letter was a masterpiece of denial and deflection. It claimed that the HOA had acted within its authority to remove an unpermitted structure, that I had been given adequate warning, and that they were not responsible for any damages because I had installed the fence in violation of community rules. The letter made no mention of the fact that they had come onto my property at 3 in the morning. It did not address the video evidence. It did not explain why Wendy had been personally supervising the demolition. It was pure legal bluster, hoping we would back down. Martin's response was swift and brutal. He filed a motion to show the court the video evidence and requested an expedited hearing given the emergency nature of the situation. He also forwarded everything to Detective Morrison, highlighting how the HOA's attorney was essentially admitting their involvement while trying to claim it was legal. The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, 12 days after I come home, to find my fence gone. During that time, I had to deal with the practical reality of not having a fence. My 2 dogs, both rescue mutts named Charlie and Scout, could not go outside unsupervised anymore. My backyard felt exposed and vulnerable. Neighbors started asking questions, and I had to explain the situation over and over. The police investigation was moving forward as well. Detective Morrison interviewed the crew from Johnson's Property Services. According to what she told me later, they initially tried to claim they thought it was a legitimate job, that the HOA had the authority to hire them to remove the fence. But when confronted with the 3 a.m. timing and Wendy's direct supervision, their stories started falling apart. The owner of Johnson's Property Services, a guy named Dale Johnson, eventually admitted that Wendy had paid him in cash and specifically told him to do the job while I was out of town, and to do it in the middle of the night to avoid conflicts with the homeowner. That statement alone was gold for the criminal case. Detective Morrison also interviewed Wendy. I was not present for that interview, but according to the detective, Wendy had initially tried to maintain that the HOA was within its rights, that I had been given proper notice, and that the fence removal was legitimate enforcement of community rules. When confronted with the video footage showing her at my property at 3 in the morning, she claimed she was just there to observe and make sure the work was done properly. When asked why it needed to be done in the middle of the night while I was out of town, she apparently had no good answer. The emergency hearing arrived faster than I expected. Martin had prepared thoroughly, and we met at the courthouse an hour before the scheduled time to go over everything. The hearing was in front of Judge Helen Cartwright, who apparently had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and little patience for HOA overreach. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, nothing like the dramatic TV versions. Judge Cartwright was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. Wendy was there with Richard Bowman, the HOA attorney. She looked stressed, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. Two other HOA board members were also present, both looking uncomfortable. Martin presented our case methodically. He showed to judge my original fence application with the certified mail receipt. He explained the 30-day automatic approval clause in the HOA's own bylaws. He presented the timeline showing that the HOA had failed to respond within the required timeframe. Then he showed the video footage. Watching it in court was surreal. The judge's expression grew more and more displeased as she watched Wendy on the screen, directing the crew as they dismantled my fence at 3 in the morning. When the footage ended, Judge Cartwright looked directly at Richard Bowman. "Counselor, does your client dispute the authenticity of this video?" she asked. Bowman stood, looking like he wished he was anywhere else. "Your Honor, we do not dispute that these events occurred. However, our position is that the HOA was acting within its authority to enforce community standards and remove a structure that was installed without proper approval." At 3 in the morning, Judge Cartwright's voice was sharp. While the homeowner was out of town, after being informed by his attorney that he had documentation showing automatic approval per your own bylaws, "Your Honor, the board believed." "I do not want to hear what the board believed," the judge interrupted. "I want to hear the legal basis for entering someone's private property in the middle of the night and removing a structure worth thousands of dollars without a court order, without law enforcement involvement, and without following any proper legal procedure." Bowman tried to argue about HOA authority and enforcement powers, but Judge Cartwright was having none of it. She pointed out that even if the fence had been improperly installed, which she was not conceding given the evidence of automatic approval, the HOA's remedy was to seek a court order for removal, not to take matters into their own hands like vigilantes. After less than an hour of arguments, Judge Cartwright issued her ruling from the bench. "I am granting the plaintiff's emergency injunction. The defendant HOA is hereby ordered to restore the fence to its original condition within 30 days, at their own expense using the same materials and professional installation. They are also ordered to pay for any damage to landscaping or other property caused during the unauthorized removal. Furthermore, the HOA is enjoined from taking any enforcement action against the plaintiff regarding this fence or levying any fines related to it. The court finds that the plaintiff properly followed the HOA's own procedures and that the fence was approved by default. Any attempts to circumvent this order will result in contempt charges." "Do you understand, Ms. Lancaster?" Wendy stood up, her face pale. "Yes, Your Honor. I am also awarding the plaintiff attorney's fees for this emergency motion." "Counselor," she looked at Martin, "please submit your fee petition within the standard time frame." "Thank you, Your Honor," Martin said. As we left the courtroom, I felt a mixture of relief and vindication. Wendy and Bowman hurried out a different exit, avoiding us entirely. Outside on the courthouse steps, Martin clapped me on the shoulder. "That went about as well as it could have," he said. "The judge saw right through their nonsense. Now we wait to see what happens on the criminal side." I did not have to wait long. 3 days after the hearing, Detective Morrison called to tell me that the prosecutor's office had decided to file charges. Wendy Lancaster was being charged with 1 count of criminal trespassing in the first degree, 1 count of criminal damage exceeding $10,000, and 1 count of theft. Dale Johnson and 2 members of his crew who had known the job was questionable were also facing charges, though lesser ones with the possibility of plea deals if they cooperated against Wendy. The news made local headlines. "HOA president charged with destroying homeowner's fence" was the basic headline across several Phoenix news outlets. A reporter from one of the local TV stations even contacted me for an interview. Martin advised me to wait until after the criminal case was resolved, so I politely declined. The community reaction was intense. I found out later that several other homeowners in Oakridge Hills had their own horror stories about Wendy and the HOA board. People started coming forward with tales of harassment, excessive fines for minor violations, and intimidation tactics. An emergency meeting was called, and a recall petition started circulating to remove Wendy and 2 other board members who had allegedly supported her actions. The fence restoration took about 2 weeks. The HOA hired a different company, and they worked during normal daylight hours to install a new fence identical to the one that had been destroyed. They also replaced the damaged landscaping and even added some new plants as compensation. I documented everything with photos and videos just in case. The criminal case moved through the system over the next several months. Dale Johnson ended up taking a plea deal, admitting to criminal trespassing and agreeing to testify against Wendy in exchange for probation. His 2 crew members got similar deals. That left Wendy facing trial on all charges. Her attorney tried to get the charges dismissed, arguing that she believed she was acting within her authority as HOA president. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Jennifer Rios, argued that Wendy's actions showed clear criminal intent. The middle of the night timing, the fact that she waited until I was out of town, the use of cash payment to the crew, All of it pointed to someone who knew what they were doing was wrong. The trial was scheduled for early November, about 6 months after the fence destruction. Martin had settled the civil lawsuit in the meantime. The HOA's insurance company, after reviewing the video evidence and Judge Cartwright's ruling, had decided to settle rather than face a jury trial. I received a settlement that covered the cost of the original fence installation, compensation for my time and stress, all legal fees, and a substantial amount for punitive damages. The settlement also included a permanent injunction preventing the HOA from taking any action regarding my fence and a removal of all previous violations and fines from my record. More importantly, the recall petition had succeeded. Wendy and 2 other board members were removed from the HOA board by a vote of the homeowners. A new board was elected, made up of reasonable people who seemed more interested in maintaining the community than in wielding petty authority. One of the first things the new board did was revise the bylaws to add clearer protections for homeowners and to limit the board's enforcement powers. The criminal trial lasted 3 days. I testified about the timeline of events, the fence installation, the disputes with Wendy, and coming home to find my fence destroyed. The video footage was played for the jury multiple times. Dale Johnson testified about Wendy hiring him, paying in cash, and specifically instructing him to do the work in the middle of the night while I was gone. Detective Morrison testified about her investigation and Wendy's various explanations that kept changing as more evidence came to light. Wendy's defense attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated volunteer who made a mistake in judgment, someone who truly believed she was enforcing community rules for the greater good. But the prosecution's case was too strong. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 3 charges. The sentencing hearing was in December. I attended, wanting to see this through to the end. The prosecutor recommended jail time, pointing out the premeditated nature of the crime and the violation of trust involved. Wendy's attorney argued for probation, emphasizing that she had no prior criminal record and that she had already suffered consequences through the recall, the civil lawsuit, and the public humiliation. Judge Michael Torres, who had presided over the trial, listened to both sides before announcing his sentence. He seemed to take the case seriously, noting that HOA board members hold positions of responsibility and trust within their communities. Ms. Lancaster, you were entrusted with authority to help maintain and improve your community. Instead, you abused that authority in a shocking way. You organized and supervised the destruction of property worth thousands of dollars. You trespassed on someone's private property in the middle of the night, and you did so in a calculated manner designed to avoid being caught. The only reason you are standing here today is because the homeowner had the foresight to install security cameras. This court cannot overlook such conduct. He sentenced Wendy to 90 days in county jail, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to me for any expenses not covered by the insurance settlement, and to complete anger management and counseling programs. Her attorney looked stunned. Wendy herself seemed to age 10 years in that moment, the reality of jail time hitting her. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a sense of closure I had not expected. The whole ordeal had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times infuriating. But justice had been served in both the civil and criminal systems. My fence was restored and protected, the HOA had new leadership, and Wendy was being held accountable for her actions. I drove home through the Phoenix afternoon traffic, the winter sun low on the horizon. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment looking at my house and my fence. The new fence looked exactly like the old one, and if you did not know the history, you would never guess what had happened. Charlie and Scout greeted me at the door, with their usual enthusiasm, tails wagging. I let them out into the backyard, watching as they ran around the enclosed space, safe and secure behind the fence that had caused so much trouble but had ultimately exposed the truth about Wendy and her abuse of power. That evening, my neighbor Tom came over with a 6-pack of beer. Tom was a retired firefighter in his 60s who had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. He had been one of the first to sign the recall petition and had testified at the HOA meeting about his own problems with Wendy's enforcement tactics. Heard about the sentencing, he said as we sat on my back patio, the fence providing privacy as we talked. 90 days seems fair. She could have gotten more. I am just glad it is over, I said, taking a sip of beer. The whole thing was insane from start to finish. You know what the crazy thing is? Tom said. If she had just approved your fence in the first place, or even if she had tried to work with you on it, none of this would have happened. Instead, she let her ego and her need for control turn a simple fence into a criminal case. He was right. The entire disaster had been avoidable at multiple points. If Wendy had just responded to my application within the required 30 days, if she had accepted Martin's letter explaining the automatic approval, if she had used proper legal channels to contest the fence even after it was up, none of the rest would have happened. Instead, she had chosen the path of midnight destruction and denial, and it had cost her everything. The trail cameras were still mounted around my property. I had upgraded them and added a few more after the fence incident. I checked them regularly now, downloading footage once a week and storing it securely. I hoped I would never need them again, but I was not taking any chances. Life in Oakridge Hills gradually returned to normal. The new HOA board was focused on actual community improvement rather than petty enforcement. They organized neighborhood events, negotiated better rates for common area maintenance, and worked with homeowners rather than against them. Violation notices became rare and were usually accompanied by friendly conversations rather than threats. I ran into Richard Bowman, the HOA's former attorney, at a coffee shop a few months after the trial. He was waiting for his order while I was sitting at a table working on my laptop. He recognized me and came over looking embarrassed. "Mr. Prescott," he said, "I wanted to apologize for my role in all that mess. I should have pushed back harder when Wendy told me what she had done. I let my client control the case when I should have been controlling my client." I was surprised by the apology. "I appreciate you saying that. For what it is worth, I do not think you knew she was going to do it. You were just dealing with the aftermath. Still, I could have handled it better. I have actually dropped most of my HOA clients since then. That case taught me that life is too short to defend people doing indefensible things." He got his coffee and left, and I never saw him again. Spring came to Phoenix, bringing warmer weather and the desert flowers blooming in brilliant colors. My fence weathered its first monsoon season without any issues, the vinyl holding up perfectly to the wind and rain. I had long since finished my work project in Flagstaff and had moved on to other assignments. One Saturday morning in April, almost exactly a year after the fence had been destroyed, I was working in my yard when a car pulled up. A young couple got out and walked over to where I was trimming some bushes. "Excuse me," the woman said. "We are looking at houses in this neighborhood. We were wondering what it is like living here. How is the HOA?" I straightened up, wiping sweat from my forehead, and smiled. "The HOA is actually pretty good now. They went through some leadership changes last year. New board is reasonable, focused on actual community issues instead of petty stuff. I would recommend the neighborhood." "We have heard some stories about HOA problems in general," the man said. "Any advice?" I thought about it for a moment. "Yeah, document everything. Keep copies of all correspondence. Know your rights and read the bylaws carefully, and if you really want to be safe, invest in some good security cameras." They thanked me and walked back to their car. I watched them drive away, then looked up at the trail camera mounted on the tree in my front yard, its lens barely visible among the leaves. Those cameras had cost me maybe $400 total. The fence they had saved had cost about $8,000 to install. The legal fees, even with the settlement covering them, had been substantial. The time and stress had been incalculable. But those cameras had captured the truth in perfect high-definition clarity, and that truth had been the foundation for everything that followed. I thought about Wendy sometimes, wondering what she was doing now. I had heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had served her 90 days and was on probation. She and her husband had put their house up for sale and moved to a different part of Phoenix, wanting a fresh start away from Oakridge Hills and the constant reminders of her fall from grace. I did not wish her ill, but I also did not feel particularly sorry for her. She had made her choices, and choices have consequences. The civil settlement money had gone toward several things. Some of it went into my savings, some toward paying off my truck, and a chunk of it went to finally finishing my garage workshop the way I had always wanted. I also donated some to a local legal aid organization that helped homeowners dealing with HOA disputes who could not afford attorneys like Martin. Speaking of Martin, he and I had become friendly beyond just the attorney-client relationship. He had been impressed with how thoroughly I had documented everything, and how the trail cameras had provided such perfect evidence. He actually started recommending to all his HOA dispute clients that they install security cameras as a first step, often citing my case as an example of why it mattered. The summer heat arrived, pushing temperatures well over 100 degrees, the kind of heat that makes you question why anyone lives in Phoenix. But I loved it, the intense sun, the dramatic monsoon storms, the stunning sunsets that painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. My fence provided shade in the backyard during the early evening, and I would sit out there with my dogs, watching the sky change colors as the temperature finally started to drop. I never did get that hunting trip with my brother, but those trail cameras had proven far more valuable in my suburban backyard than they ever would have in the wilderness. They sat silently, watchfully, recording motion and keeping digital guard over my property. Every few weeks I would check the footage, mostly seeing nothing more interesting than rabbits in the early morning or the occasional coyote passing through at night. But I kept checking, and I kept the cameras maintained and updated. Because I had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of evidence. about the power of documentation, and about how quickly a situation can escalate when people abuse whatever small amount of authority they possess. The Oakridge Hills community continued to thrive under the new board leadership. Property values actually went up slightly, possibly because the word got out that the neighborhood had reformed its HOA problems. The monthly meetings became less contentious and better attended, with homeowners actually feeling like their voices mattered. I started attending the meetings occasionally, not because I had to, but because I wanted to stay informed and be part of the community decision-making process. The new board president, a software engineer named David who lived 3 streets over, ran the meetings efficiently and fairly. The difference between his leadership and Wendy's was night and day. At one meeting, about 18 months after the fence incident, David actually brought up my case during a discussion about updating the architectural review process. "I think we all remember what happened with Aaron's fence," he said, not looking at me specifically but acknowledging my presence in the room with a nod. "That situation was a failure of process, communication, and leadership. We have made changes, but I want to make sure everyone understands that this board will never ever take enforcement action without proper legal authority and procedure. We are here to serve the community, not to rule over it." There was applause from the assembled homeowners. It was a different culture now, and it made all the difference in how people felt about living there. I thought about writing up my experience and sharing it on some of the HOA horror story forums and websites I had found during my research while fighting Wendy. People needed to know that you could fight back against HOA overreach, that documentation and evidence mattered, and that the legal system would side with homeowners when HOAs broke the law. But I kept putting it off, not quite ready to relive the whole experience in that level of detail. My career was going well. The renewable energy sector was booming, and my company had promoted me to senior engineer with a team of people working under me. The travel became less frequent, which I appreciated. I liked being home, working in my yard, spending time with my dogs, and just enjoying the house that I had fought so hard to protect. Charlie and Scout were getting older, moving a bit slower, but still enthusiastic about life. They loved the backyard and the fence that kept them safe. In a strange way, they were the real beneficiaries of all the drama. Without that fence, I would not have been able to let them outside freely, and their quality of life would have suffered. On the 2-year anniversary of the fence destruction, I did something symbolic. I took down the trail cameras, downloaded all the remaining footage, and stored it securely. Then I cleaned the cameras, replaced the batteries, and reinstalled them. It was a kind of reset, a way of marking that while I would never forget what had happened, I was also moving forward. The footage from that night in May 2 years earlier was backed up in multiple locations, burned onto DVDs, stored in the cloud, and secured in a safe deposit box. It was evidence that had changed everything, and I would preserve it forever, but I did not need to keep watching it. I had watched it enough times during the investigation, the hearings, and the trial. The truth it contained had been recognized and validated by the courts. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, and focused on my career and my home. The fence stood solid and strong, requiring virtually no maintenance thanks to the vinyl construction. The landscaping filled in where it had been damaged, and eventually you could not tell anything had ever been disturbed. I saw Tom regularly, and we became good friends. He introduced me to some of the other longtime residents of Oakridge Hills, and I became more integrated into the community social fabric. We would have barbecues in each other's backyards, get together to watch football games, and help each other with home improvement projects. The story of Wendy and the fence became part of the neighborhood lore, a cautionary tale told to new residents about the bad old days before the board changed. Some people who had not been there for it did not quite believe it had happened, thought maybe it was exaggerated. But those of us who had lived through it knew the truth, and we made sure the new board members understood the history so they would never let it happen again. Detective Morrison sent me a message on LinkedIn a year after the trial, saying she had used my case as example in a training she did about property crimes and the importance of video evidence. She said the trail camera footage was some of the clearest and most comprehensive evidence she had ever worked with in a case. It was nice to know that something positive and educational had come out of the experience. I never heard directly from Wendy again. No apology, no explanation, nothing. I did not expect one. People like her rarely truly understand or accept what they did wrong. In her mind, she was probably still the victim, persecuted for trying to enforce the rules. The mental gymnastics required to maintain that delusion while serving jail time and losing everything must have been impressive. The Johnson's Property Services Company folded about a year after the trial. Dale Johnson's involvement in the fence destruction, even though he had cooperated and testified, had damaged his reputation enough that he could not get new clients. Last I heard, he was working as a foreman for a larger landscaping company, having given up on running his own business. The insurance company that had covered the HOA's settlement payment apparently dropped them after the payout and had to find new coverage at a much higher rate. That was one of the consequences the new board had to deal with, higher insurance premiums because of Wendy's actions. But they handled it transparently, explaining to the community why the rates had gone up and what steps they were taking to prevent similar incidents. As the months turned into years, the fence story became less central to my identity in the neighborhood. I became known for other things like organizing a neighborhood watch program, helping several neighbors with electrical issues using my engineering skills, and fostering dogs for a local rescue organization. The fence was still there, still serving its purpose, but it was just a fence again rather than a symbol of a battle. I kept the trail cameras up, though. That habit never went away. Every week I would download the footage, skim through it for anything interesting, and archive it. Mostly it was boring, just the natural life of a suburban backyard. But every so often I would catch something interesting, like a bobcat passing through one night, or the time I caught a neighbor's kid retrieving a ball that had gone over the fence and being very careful not to damage anything. The cameras had become a security blanket of sorts, a way of knowing that if anything ever happened, I would have evidence. In a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain, that solid documentation provided peace of mind. 3 years after the fence incident, I was at a home improvement store picking up some supplies for a project when I saw her. Wendy Lancaster was standing in the paint section, studying color samples. She looked older, more worn down, her face lined with stress that had not been there before. She had not seen me, and I debated whether to just walk away. But something made me approach. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was a desire for closure, maybe it was just the human need to confront the past. "Hello, Wendy," I said quietly. She turned, and her face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, fear, anger, and finally resignation. "Aaron," she said, her voice flat. We stood there for a moment, two people connected by a bizarre and painful history, not quite knowing what to say. "How have you been?" I asked, which was probably the most awkward question possible under the circumstances. "Fine," she said automatically, then seemed to reconsider. "No, not fine, but I am managing. I am working as an office manager now, trying to rebuild." I nodded. "I am glad you are getting back on your feet." She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "Are you glad, I mean, after everything?" I thought about it honestly. I am not glad about what happened. The whole thing was terrible for everyone involved. But I am glad the truth came out. I am glad there were consequences, and yes, I am glad you are moving forward. Holding on to anger does not help anyone. She was quiet for a moment, then said something I did not expect. "I am sorry for all of it. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, enforcing the rules, protecting property values. But I was really just on a power trip, and I hurt you and a lot of other people. I am sorry. It was not a perfect apology, and it did not undo anything that had happened, but it was something. I appreciate you saying that." We talked for a few more minutes, awkward but civil. She told me about her probation, about the therapy she was required to attend, about how it had actually helped her understand her behavior, and why she had escalated situations that should have been minor. I told her a bit about the new HOA board and how the community was doing better. Eventually, we said goodbye and went our separate ways. I did not expect to see her again, and I was okay with that. The conversation had given me a sense of closure I had not known I needed. She had acknowledged what she did, apologized, and was trying to move forward. That was enough. Driving home, I thought about the entire journey, from that first violation notice about the garbage cans to running into Wendy in the paint aisle. It had been a wild ride, full of stress and conflict, but also filled with lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation, about how systems of justice can work when you have evidence, and about how communities can change for the better. The fence stood in my backyard, solid and unremarkable, serving its purpose day after day. The trail cameras watched silently, recording the mundane details of suburban life. And I lived my life, secure in the knowledge that I had fought for what was right and won. Sometimes I would give advice to friends or coworkers dealing with their own HOA issues. The advice was always the same. Read your bylaws carefully, document everything in writing, keep copies of all communications, and for the love of God, install security cameras. You never know when you might need evidence that something happened exactly the way you say it did. The story had a happy ending, which is not always the case with HOA disputes. Many people spend years fighting battles they cannot win, draining their savings on legal fees, or just giving up and moving away. I had been lucky in many ways, such as having the foresight to install the cameras, having the resources to hire a good attorney, and having video evidence so clear that it could not be disputed or explained away. But it was not just luck. It was also about being prepared, being thorough, and being willing to fight when necessary. Wendy had counted on me backing down, on being intimidated by her authority and the threat of fines and legal action. She had been wrong, and that miscalculation had cost her everything. As the years continued to pass, the fence incident became a smaller part of my life story, still significant but no longer defining. I had other experiences, other challenges, other victories. The fence was just there, doing its job, protecting my property and my dogs, requiring nothing but the occasional cleaning. But I never forgot the lesson those trail cameras had taught me. In a dispute, especially one involving property or legal rights, evidence is everything. Truth matters, but truth needs proof. And when you have 4 trail cameras running, capturing everything in high definition from multiple angles, the truth cannot be denied no matter how hard someone tries. The Oakridge Hills HOA continued to function smoothly under sensible leadership. Property values remained stable. Neighbors got along. Violations were handled with common sense and communication rather than power trips and midnight demolitions. It was what an HOA should be, a tool for maintaining community standards without becoming a tyrannical micromanagement organization. I stayed in that house for many years, long after the fence incident faded into history. The fence outlasted 3 different HOA boards, saw 2 dogs age and eventually pass away while new rescue dogs took their place, and weathered countless Arizona summers and monsoon seasons. It never caused another problem because there was never another Wendy Lancaster on the board, never another person willing to abuse their tiny bit of authority to such an extreme degree. And every time I looked at that fence, I remembered the night I came home to find it gone, the shock and anger and disbelief. I remembered watching the trail camera footage for the first time, seeing Wendy direct the destruction of my property with her own hands. I remembered the legal battles, the hearings, the trial, and finally the justice. But mostly, I remembered the relief of knowing that when someone commits a crime against you, even someone in a position of neighborhood authority, the system can work. Evidence matters. Truth matters. And sometimes a $400 investment in trail cameras can save you from thousands of dollars in losses and countless hours of stress. The fence stood, the cameras watched, and life in Oakridge Hills went on, peaceful and normal, the way it always should have been.